Feingold was invited to come, but he could not make it, so he sent a message for us to read for the Kinnamans. To my great friends and the Rock County Democrats, I truly regret being unable to be with you to honor my dear friends Ted and Jan Kinnaman. From the Gene McCarthy rally at New Rock in March of 1968 to my very last rally of the 2016 campaign on Main Street in Janesville and scores of times in between, they were always there smiling at me, supporting me, and mentoring me. Thank you, Ted and Jan. You are great Democrats and wonderful people. Your friend, Russ Feingold. Now I'd like to turn this over to Deb Kolste.
Thank you, everyone. What a magnificent crowd. So thank you for allowing me to be here. So I'm actually going to read from prepared marks because I'm a little nervous that I might get a little teary. Ted and Jan are very special people. I'm so honored to be able to give the salute to Ted and Jan Kinnaman, and even more proud to call them my friends. No one has meant more to Rock County Democrats and progressives than the Kinnamans. You know, actually, to kind of newcomers like me, Ted is synonymous with the Rock County Dems. We in the party have always needed more people who can organize and recruit, who are willing to stand up in public and say what they believe and what is important for other people to know, and then to absorb the abuse that comes with public activism. Ted and Jan are doers, and our party and country need more of them right now. We need people who will speak the truth without fear, people who will show up and stand up. We need more organizers, writers, and people who will translate convictions into action. So what we need more of is Ted and Jan and people like them. The Kinnamans have given their talents and treasures and opened their homes to so many Democrats since the 60s, when they were the local arm of Eugene McCarthy campaign. There have been years and decades of meetings, marches, knocking on doors, years of standing in the cold with signs, trying to interest and educate citizens about peace and civil rights. They know the hard work. But the Kinnamans are not just political activists. They are just as importantly community activists. For decades they have worked for the good of the community in ways that have nothing to do with political parties. They are involved in the good work in their church. Jan helped organize ECHO. Ted and Jan served on the library board. Jan was on the board of the Rock County Youth Home Advisory Board. And Ted and Jan basically were the American Civil Liberties Union right here in Janesville. And it goes on, always helping their neighbors and community. I knew Ted and Jan before I ever met them. I read their letters and articles in the Gazette, and I recognized them in the feature articles in the Gazette that gave account of people who are always working for peace and civil rights. So I was already an admirer in 1990s before I got to meet them. I met Ted because of both of our interest in public education. Ted was on the school board, and I was involved in PTA. I went before the board a couple of times to speak about items, and one day Ted called out of the blue and said, asked me to run for school board. And so that began my little journey, because Ted Kinnaman asked me to. I got to serve on the board with Ted, and we became friends and allies. And because I was Ted's friend, I became friends with Jan, a friendship that was enhanced by mutual appreciation of all that the League of Women Voters does. These two have been encouraging me and many others in this room since I have known them, I can never really express how fully their collective knowledge has meant to me. And their advice has been priceless. Such as the suggestion by Jan after one long-winded speech when she leaned over to me and said, "What part of less is more do they not understand?" That's probably why I am known for my brevity on floor speeches. Before I end, let me say, I have never had friends who are more well-read, especially about the history. I've never met kinder people or anyone more dedicated to democracy, civil rights, peace, and justice. You know, I am sure the Kinnamans are sometimes discouraged by the wars and misadventures that we engage in and the corrupt decisions of our courts and leaders. We all get discouraged or fearful. But Ted and Jan never falter in doing the humble work of the local party or serving the community or trying to find ways to get Americans of different backgrounds and hues to embrace each other and our common humanity. That is what they are. And neither should we. America can be a better place, and it is our job to help it so. No defeat of justice and democracy is permanent, and we have a duty to continue the fight. That is the message and the lives and careers of Ted and Jan. Ted and Jan, I want you to know that this speech was given in love, true love and appreciation, and I hope it was under 5 minutes. And in this county, we are very lucky to be represented by Representative Mark Spreitzer, Representative Don Brewing, and Senator Janis Ringhand. If you would come down, we'd like to present a token of our appreciation to Ted and Jan. Can you read it?
Ted and Jan.
Thank you for your dedication
Thank you for your dedication to
progressive ideals.
keep spading out, Democratic Party of Rock County, May 7th, 2017. And this is a beautiful picture of Ted holding a sign that says, Walker plus Coke equals fascism.
When I look around tonight, is that better? Yeah. Okay. When I look around tonight, I cannot help but be grateful to see the large number of friends and acquaintances, not only from Janesville and Rock County, but from Madison and even Chicago as well. We wish we could thank each of you individually and recall the numerous issues that we have pursued together. But lacking that, I want to share with you an image that has stuck in my mind for many years now. It is a circular image. The central figure being a workman with one arm raised while shouting, "The cause, the cause." So may I urge all of you to continue to support the cause.
How could I follow that ad? Ted speaks for his family. All of us feel that way. And I would only add to what he said one word. And that word is solidarity.
Nichols is a frequent guest on radio and television programs as a commentator on politics and media issues. He is a co-founder of Free Press, a media reform network, and has written extensively on the threats to journalism and fair media coverage. He is the author and co-author of many influential books, including Uprising on the Wisconsin protest, and with Robert McChesney, most recently, People Get Ready. He continues to unearth the narratives of our country's unsung and unknown heroes and heroines, laying a solid foundation for the ongoing progressive revolution towards justice. John Lewis, in his book Across That Bridge, writes that when they were on the bridge in Selma, he felt that they were not alone, that there was a felt presence of those who had fought for justice before them. John Nichols continues to remind us that a country that could produce these morally powerful activists in the past could do so again. He always provides us with clarity and inspiration, so we're very fortunate to have him here to give us direction in these tumultuous times.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That was awful nice. That's a good introduction. Thank you. Well, all right, he read that just how I wrote it. I feel very regal up here. Kind of, something always bothers me about the trade union movement, and that is that they have these huge stages up front, you know. And it does strike me that we should probably all be down on the same floor together. Because if there is a point to this thing, it is not that there's somebody up front lecturing to you. It is that we are all in this struggle together. As Jan just said, the point is solidarity and equality and economic and social justice for all of us. And I can barely see Ted down there.
Love you, John.
I love you more. I can barely see Ted, and that's often been the case. I was amazed. I have to tell you, I was stunned by this video presentation here, because I had no idea that Ted ever had hair that wasn't white. I have known Ted since I was a little kid, and he's always had white hair. And so I was fascinated to see he was this dark-haired, handsome, kind of dapper fella there. And so where to begin? I think there's probably only one way to begin here, talking about these wonderful people and all this wonderful solidarity that we have tonight. And that is to tell you that, as some of you know, Ted got in a little bit of trouble, and this is good, because as you get older, you want to get in more trouble. The worst thing that ever happens to anyone is if they think you're like old and harmless. That's a horrible thing to be. And so, just the other day, they ran a picture of Ted in the paper, right? And it's Walker and the Kochs equals fascism. And there are folks, I understand there were some calls to the paper saying, we don't like you referring to our governor as a fascist. And I thought, well, how would that distinguish him from our president? But in honor of Ted's sign, just to prove who was right and who was wrong, taking people that do not know Ted at all, separate people, we set this up for today to have this all, we sort this issue out once and for all. Is Ted Kinnaman right? to express not only his fear about fascism, but the notion that when someone is identified as a fascist, without a question, that they get beat. And so we asked the people of France to weigh in on this issue. And by a 2-to-1 margin, they rejected fascism today. I'm good with that. And here's the interesting thing. I'm not trying to, I don't really believe in all this, mumbo jumbo about, like mystical stuff. But here I was driving to the hall on Lafayette Avenue. And I was thinking that the Marquis de Lafayette, he helped us a lot when we revolted against the British colonialists, who were in fact their era's equivalent of, like a wealthy billionaire from New York. And it just struck me that if France just rejected fascism, then I think there's a pretty good chance that within our lifetimes, and in fact, within relatively near days and times, this country will, in honor of Ted Kinnaman and Jan Kinnaman, reject the far right and return to its own true principles as a nation where all people are created equal and where no billionaire tells us how we ought to live. Now, I hope at no point in that did anyone take the suggestion that I think that Donald Trump is a fascist. Fascists are very organized and very well, they tend to have thought things through quite carefully, and there's very little evidence that Trump has that level has brought that level of care and interest to the process. But with that said, I couldn't be more honored to be here tonight. This is a really big deal to me. It's wonderful that there's so many people in this room, and the people said, "Oh wow, they came to see you," and I can guarantee you they didn't. They came because of something that is absolutely wonderful, absolutely glorious about the trade union movement and the progressive causes to which many of us have dedicated our lives. And that is that we understand that it is a long-term struggle, that you don't expect to win every fight. Or if you're Ted and Jan, you don't expect to win any fight. No, you don't expect to, but if you win, you get elected to the school board, that's cool. But the fact of the matter is, you commit at a certain point in your life. And maybe you commit because you are experiencing something in your life that tells you that you have to be a part of something bigger than you. You may be a worker in a factory, you join a trade union. You may be an African American person living in the South. You may be a Latino working as a migrant laborer. You may be an LGBTQ kid growing up someplace thinking that nobody cares about you. But whatever you are, there comes a point where you think that you have to be into something bigger than yourself. You have to believe in something, and you have to believe that there are not just a few people out there, but millions of people who share your ideals and your values, and you may not win every fight, but you know that if you raise that banner, others will gather with you. And if you cry out solidarity, others will answer that call. And there are tens of millions of us who have made that commitment at some point in our lives. And we don't win every battle, but brothers and sisters, we never stop, because at the end of the day, it isn't about one battle. It is the old struggle, the struggle that is as old as this country, the struggle that says we are all created equal and we all have a right to the same economic and social justice that we have demanded throughout our lives and throughout our history. And Ted and Jan Kinnaman made that commitment decades ago. And brothers and sisters, we honor them tonight because they have never stumbled in that great battle to take us to the higher ground. This is a big deal. This is big. This is, I can name you a dozen presidents that didn't do as much good for this country as Ted and Jan. I'm serious. And you can start right in the current moment. But the fact of the matter is that there are people who make a commitment at a very young point in their lives. And their commitment is to show up, to be there. And sometimes their commitment is to open the office when they're not sure anyone else will come. Their commitment is to go against their own political party when they don't think it is right. Their commitment is to go sometimes in a direction that will cause other people in their community to not be overly happy with them. But they do it because they know there's something true. There's something deeper that matters more. When Ted and Jan made their commitment to oppose the war in Vietnam, that war had an overwhelming approval among the American people. It was a popular war. People forget. Vietnam was once a popular war. It had good poll numbers. People who supported that war got elected to positions. But Ted and Jan knew it was wrong. Now, they were down here in Janesville, Wisconsin. Now, there's intellectuals in New York City, and there's like college professors in Berkeley going, oh, I'm against the war, right? People on college campuses far away. But the way that we stopped that war, the way that we finally ended the madness of that Vietnam War wasn't because of somebody in Berkeley or New York. It was because of people in places like Janesville. People who said, I will bring this anti-war movement home to where I live. And I will raise that banner. I will put that sign up. I will go to that march. If there's a Vietnam moratorium in 1969, I'll be out there. On October 15th, Ted, you were out there. And on November 15th, Jan, you were out there. And on December 15th, they had 3 moratoriums, 3 months after every 15th. And I know the Kinnamans were there because I was a little kid in Union Grove, Wisconsin, which is even smaller than Janesville. In fact, I actually thought Janesville was the big city. And there were these people in Janesville, which was a place I could relate to much more easily than New York or Washington. And they were named Ted and Jan Kinnaman, and their name was on every letter, on every ad in the paper, and on every message that said that we will stop an immoral and illegal war. And if they had the courage to do it in Janesville when I was 10 years old, I had the courage to do it in Union Grove, Wisconsin. Brothers and sisters, they inspired people across this state and across this country because they got doing it before anybody else did. They were among the first, and they didn't do it in New York or Berkeley. They did it in Janesville. And they did it for civil rights. Joe Costa, where are you at? State Representative Joe Costa Zamaripa is here, right? She represents the south side of Milwaukee. She has no reason to be here whatsoever. And yet she is here in Rock County, sitting next to her excellent fellow state representative down there. But she is here in Rock County to honor the Kinnamans. Now, why would a Latina, member of the LGBTQ community, pioneering state representative, pioneering leader on feminist issues, gay and lesbian rights issues, civil rights issues, immigration issues, economic justice issues. Why would she be here? Because Ted and Jan Kinnaman were standing up for her before she was born. thing about being an old lefty is? I will tell you, Tim Cullen. I will tell you what the cool thing about being an old lefty is. At the end of the day, when you get old enough, people show up to thank you for actually having been right the whole time, including people that weren't even with you along the way. It's an amazing thing. You don't know how smart you get when you get old. It's true. So, yeah. George Mcgovern had this great story. Mcgovern, who loved the Kinnamans, right? You know, the pictures of the two of them. I remember those. I was a complete tragedy to my family at every turn. But I was into politics when I was like nothing. Tim and I actually ran the Les Aspin booth at the Racine County Fair in 1970. And actually, he ran it. I was just an annoyance. But this, I've been around this thing for a long, long time. And I can tell you, this is the interesting thing about it. That when Mcgovern started running in 72, there was like this list of people. They listed people around Wisconsin that were for Mcgovern when no one was for him, right? When he had no support. And there was the Kinnamans' names, right? And they always did this cool thing. Ted, you always did this cool thing. You put Janesville after your name, which was a really big deal because everybody else was Madison. And then there was this Janesville. And you thought, well, okay, well, it's statewide then. But Mcgovern had this great story. I knew him almost all my life. And Mcgovern had this great story that, of course he got beat narrowly. As I recall it, and so he gets beat in 72. And then, of course, the guy who beat him, Richard Milhouse Nixon, kind of went to hell pretty quick. And, within 2 years had to resign in shame and the whole bit like that. And Mcgovern said that every time he walked through the airport, any place in America, every person in the airport came up to him and said, hey, I just want you to know I voted for you. And Mcgovern said at a certain point, and he kept count, of course, and he said at a certain point, it's now clear that if everyone who told me they voted for me had voted for me, I would have won by a bigger landslide than Nixon did. And that's what history does to us. It makes us decide we want to actually be on the right side of things. So segregationists from the South, all they remember is, I eventually got kind of good on some of those race issues. But they weren't good when it mattered. They got good when it became acceptable to do that. People who backed horrible wars, they got, I realized that was a bad war, right? And so they kind of come around for you. People who said, marriage equality? I don't think so. That's like way too much to ask. That's taking us way too far. And then once it's going to say, I just went to my lesbian cousin's wedding and it was fabulous. These are really good people. And again and again and again, you have folks who tell you that, I've been with you the whole time. But they weren't with you the whole time. They came when it was easy. The people who matter are those who came when it was hard. And And when I look around this whole great state of Wisconsin, and it's not because I happen to be here with the Kinnamans and it's easy to compliment them. When I look around this great state of Wisconsin, and this is a wonderful state. This is the greatest state in the Union. There is simply no question of that. It just happens we're passing through a difficult period. But when I look around this great state, and I look at the people who were right before it was easy, on every single issue. And I mean every single issue. Civil rights, LGBTQ rights, 18 to 21-year-old voting, stopping horrible wars, standing up for labor unions and working people, standing up for economic and social justice for those who didn't have even a labor union to represent them. When I look around this state and I say, who was there? Who was there before it was easy? It's not a very long list. And the interesting thing is, on every measure, when you go and look, Ted and Jan Kinnaman weren't just on the list. They didn't just add their name at the bottom. List after list after list, their names were at the top. They signed the petition first. They put the yard sign up first. They gave the contribution first. They got on the bus to go to the rally first. They rented the bus and organized the people that were going to the rally. And brothers and sisters, if we don't honor that, then we have no respect for anything, and we have no respect for our progressive movement, because the point of a progressive movement is to grow and to build and to get better and stronger. But somebody has to start the march. And in this great state, in the modern era of the Democratic Party, if you look at the people who started that great march out of places like Janesville, and I can name a couple others around the state, but out of places like Janesville, industrial cities where sometimes even the political party was a little locked in its ways and said, you know what, we got to get a little better. We got to be not just about economic issues, we've got to be about social issues. We got to be about not just the plant, but also about war and peace. We got to be about a whole bunch of bigger things. If I look at the list of the people who started that march, on every single issue, Ted and Jan Kinnaman started the march. So, I could say this 1,000 different ways, but I adore them. And I respect them tremendously. And I'm honored that we could gather to recognize them. And I know that almost everybody in this room could tell more about them and give you more. But I want to honor them in a way that the French did with their vote today. And that is to maybe give you a little bit of hope. Because I think that to be a progressive, to be somebody who's on the right side of so many issues, the bottom line is hope. The bottom line is believing in things enough to say that I know that I'm right about this. And I know that there will come a time, Matt Flynn, there will come a time when other people will recognize what is right. And so let us talk about the 2018 election. Now, I know I'm in Janesville, Wisconsin. They write books about Janesville, Wisconsin now. They make documentaries about Janesville. Janesville's like a big deal now. Everybody's really interested in Janesville. And you know why they're interested in Janesville? They're interested in Janesville because they want to turn you into a cliche. Right. They want to turn you into, like, this is the image of the old industrial town where the factory closed and things got hard, and they want you to fit into the simple box. And I have come tonight to honor the Kinnamans, but I have also come to thank you for not being that cliche, for being something richer and deeper and better and stronger than people who don't live here understand. Because you know what that cliche would tell you? That cliche would tell you that Donald Trump's going to win this place. No, that's right. They're like, oh, in Washington and New York, they're afraid to come out here in America. They're like, you live in the middle of the country? What are you on, some research project? I said, no, my family's lived there for 200 years. They're like, yeah, but you could get out. And I'm like, no, I want to be there because there's more to these places. I grew up over by Kenosha. Our auto plant's gone too. And we're in a transitional period in this country. This is a radical transitional period. And it's really rough and it's really tough for towns like Janesville. But not every town like Janesville takes the hits that Janesville has taken and then says, okay, I give up. I'm going to back whoever says make America great again. This county, Rock County, had a chance to show us who it was last year. And Rock County didn't vote for Donald Trump. Rock County gave Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine a landslide victory. They had over a 10-point lead in this county. The fact of the matter is, if every other industrial town in this country had given them that 10-point lead, we would have a different president today. So you need to understand that you came through those hard times with a sense of conscience and a sense of focus that other places didn't have. And last year, when this state screwed up horribly and didn't send Russ Feingold back to the United States Senate, his home county gave him 56% of the vote and a landslide victory in this county. This county did so well, the Feingolds are still proud to show up here. And the fact is, you send these incredible people to our state legislature, right? Now, Representative Spreitzer back, he did pretty good. He got 98.2% of the vote in the last election. That ain't bad. That ain't bad. You didn't do quite that well, did you, Janis? No, but holding your own. But with all due respect, our representative from Beloit, he just didn't quite have the heft that Deb Kolste did. Because he got 98.2, she got 98.5% of the vote last November. That's a nigh on North Korean total. I tell you that because, say, there are these bastions of democratic faith. And I dare say, as the Democratic Party begins to realize what it must become, as it becomes more the party that Ted and Jan fought for throughout their lives, a more progressive party more committed to economic and social justice, a party, I would say, with respect to some folks, party that looks a little bit more like Bernie Sanders was talking about. Another guy who won this county, by the way. But as the Democratic Party becomes more of what it should be, there are these places around the state that have held firm to the faith and that become the base of what will be next. We Wisconsinites have been through a pretty rough last 6-7 years. We should not deny it. It's been lousy. And things have not been as we would want them to be in this state. I'm so proud of my state. I love my state so much. I just tell the story up to 2010. But I want to start telling the whole story, right? I want to kind of keep it going. And Ted and Jan are just old enough. We got a couple other people in this room that actually are a little older who will tell you that we've been through hard times before. I mean, in the old days, when I would tell the story of Wisconsin, I would always kind of like gloss over a certain period in the 50s. And if I was talking to like some elder hostile group, somebody would raise their hand and say, yeah, but what about Joe McCarthy? And I would always say, well, we did that, right? Because we wanted to really take on something big. So we put him in there so we could take him down. But the interesting thing is that this state reelected Joe McCarthy. We didn't do it right. We screwed up. And we screwed up for about 10 years. It was a lousy, awful time. But at the end of that period where we screwed up so badly, two things happened. One, Joe McCarthy died. And nobody applauded. That's not nice. Although I will tell you, I read the Capital Times editorial on the day he died. And in a gracious moment, the Capital Times said, we're really sorry that he's passed. We wished he could have lived another year so we could have voted him out of office. But after that McCarthy period, what you have to understand is what happened in 1958. 1958, McCarthy passes on. Bill Proxmire gets elected to his seat. This is a state that was the first Democrat to win a Senate seat in 25 years in this state, right? And then the next year comes along, and they nominated the most liberal member of the Wisconsin State Senate, a young guy who most people in the state had never heard of, named Gaylord Nelson. He didn't get nominated because it was a good gig. He got nominated because nobody else wanted the gig. Nobody else wanted to run for governor. And they nominated, his lieutenant governor candidate was Filio Nash. And Filio Nash, nobody had ever heard of. He was like a cranberry farmer from up in Marshfield. As a good Wisconsinite, he had been Harry Truman's aide and had advised him to be for civil rights. And so Filio was a good guy, but nobody had heard of him. And they went down that ticket, and they had all these people that nobody had ever heard of that didn't have a chance. And they were up against this Republican Party that had all this strength and all this power and had literally been winning for decades in Wisconsin. And the Democratic Party was small and it was pathetic. And they literally drove around in their car and goofed around. Like Gaylord Nelson and Pat Lucy would be driving around. And they actually would go to McCarthy rallies out front and yell like nasty things. Now, I'm not kidding. And so here they were. They were protesters, they were rebels, they were people who were passionate trade unionists, they were anti-war folks, they didn't like nuclear power, they were like so far out there they couldn't possibly get elected. And then they had this labor lawyer from Racine, Jerry Flynn, running down in the 1st Congressional District. Jerry had never been elected to anything. And I tell you, he's a friend of my dad's. He was, I think it can safely be said, Jerry didn't look like somebody who would ever be elected to anything. And he was so into labor, he'd only campaign in the union halls. He was out here, all these places. So then comes election day, 1958. And you know what happened? First off, the returns start coming in for governor. Gaylord Nelson, the left-wing, far-out, crazy Madison State Senator, he got elected governor. Filio Nash got elected lieutenant governor. They swept all the statewide offices. They swept the state assembly. They swept the state senate. They won the U.S. Senate seat, and they even sent Jerry Flynn to Congress from this district, literally the first Democrat in the modern era, and they did it all at a point where everybody told them it was impossible. And so I like to think about 1958 as I think about 2018. Because, yeah. So in honor of Ted and Jan Kinnaman, I will tell you one little basic set of facts here, and they go quick, but let me just tell you about Wisconsin, where many of you live. Wisconsin is a state where we are nice to you to your face. But when you leave the room, we may have a little something to say. And it's like, we are not like Minnesota nice, where they grit their teeth and are nice all the time. We are a different kind of nice. And our kind of nice is that we get you in the end. And this is the interesting thing about it. Do you know what is the absolute fact of Wisconsin? We despise newly elected presidents. It's our nature. It's who we are. We're not as nice as we seem. And now I know it's easy to despise this guy. But I'm telling you that we have a long tradition of despising newly elected presidents. Now, when Gaylord and all those people won in 58, now he wasn't newly elected, but Eisenhower had just won a landslide election in 1956. Everybody said the Republicans had it all. 2 years later, Democrats sweep. 10 years later, Richard Nixon gets elected President of the United States. 1968, Republicans got pretty much everything. 1970, 2 years after Nixon, right, that next election cycle, Wisconsin elects Pat Lucy as governor. We re-elect Proxmire to the Senate. We send a whole bunch of new Democrats to the state legislature. We send more Democrats to Congress. We sent Les Aspin to Congress from this district after having literally the worst congressman in the country. And won everything. What? You talking about Shatterberg? He was awful. And no, but so won all those offices in 1970, just a sweep. It was such a big victory that when one of the older Republican legislators who had gotten reelected came in and said, I know I'm going to have to move to a different office in the building. And the guy who was the new majority leader was saying, yeah, we can work with that. And one of his assistants kind of leaned in and said, Esther, where you're going, there's not going to be room for an office. And I mean, they were very, very excited about their power, and they did a lot of good stuff. A lot of women came in, all sorts of different folks. Then 1980, Ronald Reagan gets elected president. And it's a big sweep. Everybody says Reagan's in. It's big, all stuff like that. Gaylord got beat. 2 years later, 1982, Tony Earl gets elected governor of Wisconsin. They win up and down the slate, and the legislature sweeps overwhelmingly to the Democrats. It's a huge victory. Okay, well that's okay. So we got that happened in 58. It happened in 68. It happens in 82. There's this like weird pattern going here, and then right? Okay, George Bush gets elected president in 2000. Right? And he wins, and it's all this stuff like that. 2 years later, 2002, Jim Doyle gets elected governor. All the Democrats win up and down the ticket. We even elect the best attorney general in the history of Wisconsin, Peg Lautenschlager. Democrats win congressional seats. They win legislative seats. Everything's going great. And you're like, wow, this is starting to be a very interesting pattern. We elect a new president, and then everything goes good. And then 2008 happens and Barack Obama gets elected president and everybody's feeling great. And then 2 years later, unfortunately, we get the curse of the thing, which is that Scott Walker wins and all these Republicans win all these offices. They win all this power. Again and again and again, when we get a new president, Democrat or Republican, 2 years later, Wisconsin, in a fit of spite, elects the other party. And so, brothers and sisters of Rock County, I come to tell you that one of you should probably run for governor. I like Tim, I like Matt, there's all sorts of good people in the room, but one of you should probably run for governor. I wouldn't mind if it's a woman. And in fact, I kind of would like it, Deb. But the bottom line is, settled. We have a nominee. But all I'm telling you, I come to tell you, Rock County, that I know it's easy to get depressed. I know it is easy to get disappointed. I know it is frustrating to have to get up every morning and resist Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, there are millions of women in the streets. We had our first March for Science. We've got people marching on climate change. We've got people marching on civil rights. We've got people marching for immigrant rights. We've got people marching for religious freedom. We've got all these people churning up, and we happen to live in a spiteful state that likes to vote out the party that's in power when a new president is in office. And so, brothers and sisters, I don't come to give you any kind of depressing news. I come to honor Ted and Jan Kinnaman by telling them that next year we are going to have one of the greatest victories for economic and social justice, and we will dedicate that victory to Ted and Jan Kinnaman. Solidarity, brothers and sisters. Solidarity. Brothers and sisters, I love you. Do not sit down. Everybody stay on your feet. This is the big part of this. Nothing I have done has mattered. What matters now is this. Ted and Jan have to stand up. You got to stand up. You can lean against this if you want, but you have to stand here. All right? No, you do not look at that crowd. You look at me. You look at me. All right? No, you're not taking pictures. This is my picture. Ted and Jan, you're coming. This is serious. Now, you can lean against this because you're coming right here. Okay? This is a big deal. We will only do this once, and it is an incredible thing. So, Ted and Jan, first off, you need to do as Jan suggested, and I saw her do it there, which I loved. Jan had her fist up, clenched fist of solidarity. Ted talked about that, workers' clenched fist of solidarity. It is the symbol of civil rights activists, of labor rights activists, of human rights activists throughout history. In South Africa, when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison, he raised his fist in that clenched fist. It is a symbol of pride, and is a symbol of our Wisconsin struggle. So Ted and Jan, I got to ask you to raise your clenched fists here. That's right. And I have to ask everyone else in this room, while we take the picture of Ted and Jan Kinnaman in front of a huge crowd of people who are, in fact, as Jan suggested, raising your clenched fists in solidarity. Please chant solidarity. Solidarity. All right, look at that. That is the most beautiful picture I've ever taken. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. Solidarity. There you go, brother.